This is a 3D printed model that I made in collaboration with the anatomy program at Monash University. Monash is leading the world in the creation of 3D printed anatomical models. And so this was created from a surface scanned cadaveric donor brain that was then superimposed by the 3D model of the circle of Willis here in pink and the cranial nerves shown in this yellow color. The model is pretty neat on the back. You can see the cross-section that corresponds, the MRI, that corresponds to this particular slice. And so what I'm going to do is to walk you through what the anatomical relationships of the cranial nerves on the surface of the brainstem. When you look at this model, the midbrain is actually a little bit hidden. Here's the cerebral peduncles. They are underneath the vasculature. Here's the nice image of the pons, and then we have the medulla here. In terms of the vasculature, you can see the vertebral arteries coming together to form the basilar. At the top of the basilar, they split to form the posterior cerebral artery. That forms the posterior circulation. The anterior circulation is formed by the internal carotid that comes in and branches into the anterior cerebral and the middle cerebral, which is diving here into the sylvian fissure to serve the blood supply for the lateral brain. And then we have our communicating arteries that form the circle, anterior communicating and posterior communicating. Finally, we have our cerebellar arteries. Here's superior cerebellar, and then the anterior inferior cerebellar, the ICA, and the pica, the posterior inferior cerebellar. That's laying over the medulla. All right, so now let's dive into the cranial nerves. So let's go number by number. Cranial nerve 1 actually can't be seen because what we're seeing here is the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. This is not the nerve. The nerve is dangling through the cribriform plate, hanging down inside the nose, collecting olfactory molecules. But we'll count this as related to cranial nerve 1. Cranial nerve 2 is shown here, right? This is the optic nerve that forms the optic chiasm. And here's the stalk of the pituitary that hangs out just dorsal. Cranial nerve 3 is found in the interpeduncular fossa. And it is sandwiched by the posterior cerebral artery and the superior cerebellar artery. That's cranial nerve 3, ocular motor. Cranial nerve 4 comes out of the dorsal aspect of the brainstem, and you can see just a tiny little bit of cranial nerve 4 that's coming from the dorsal aspect of the brainstem, wrapping about around the midbrain. So cranial nerve 3 is ocular motor, cranial nerve 4 is trochlear. Then we have cranial nerve 5. This is the trigeminal, and it comes out right at the middle lateral aspect of the pons. Then we have 6, 7, and 8. I always remember these because they're at the crease, at the division between the pons and the medulla. And you see cranial nerve 6, which is the abducens, cranial nerve 7, and cranial nerve, which is facial, and cranial nerve 8 kind of hiding behind here, which is the vestibulocochlear. Then if you go to the dorsal aspect of the olive, you'll find cranial nerve 9, 10, and 11, which are superior to inferior, that chunk of 3. So 9 is glossopharyngeal, 10 is the big one, that's the vagus, that wanders through the whole body, and then we have 11, the spinal accessory. Finally, the last cranial nerve 12, is located in between the pyramid of the medulla and the olive of the medulla.